Well, I was a senior in high school, November 22nd, 1963, when I heard over the school intercom that the president had been shot. My recollection is that that was the announcement, not that he'd been assassinated or that he was dead, but that he'd been shot. I left the school and went home, and the television was on. My mother was crying. She was very emotional over what had happened. And we watched the events that followed almost nonstop for days with live coverage. Back then there were 3 channels, and we watched them. And I remember the events as they played out. You know, the announcement that the president had in fact died, the assumption of authority by Lyndon Johnson, who was sworn in on the plane with Jacqueline Kennedy there, still with blood on her dress. So it was an orderly transition of power. And then in later days, watching the funeral procession, watching live on television Jack Ruby shooting Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald being the assassin and Jack Ruby being his assassin. All of that played out on television because the networks were covering it nonstop, fairly nonstop. So it was a very traumatic time for the nation, very traumatic time for our family, and a time, the beginning of a series of events in that decade that I believe profoundly affected an entire generation. The assassination of John F. Kennedy affected the country, in my view, in much the same way as the terrorist attack on 9/11 affected the country, or the bombing of the Murrah building affected people in Oklahoma City and Oklahoma. It's not something that you get over overnight. It's a profound impact and effect that lasts for months, and for many of us, speaking in reference to the bombing of the Murrah building, it still affects us emotionally when we think about it or talk about it.